thankful to have the opportunity to talk and collaborate with a good group of folks. Hopefully you have a lot of questions. I appreciate CEO Center State, asking me to be on this panel, and look forward to our quick hour together.
Thank you very, very much. We're going to start off with Laura, and she is going to give us a little insight into some of the legal issues behind hiring during this time. So take it away.
Thank you, Beth. So we thought we would start with laying the groundwork and the foundation that will exist throughout our hour together here. The basic principles of hiring and interviewing that we ought to have in mind. The first thing to keep in mind is that all of our usual legal rules still apply, right, in many ways. So we know that when we are making hiring decisions, we cannot discriminate on any of the bases that you see here on the screen. This is a fairly comprehensive list. There actually are a couple of additional, kind of lesser known and more nuanced bases of discrimination. But this is our usual list, right? The list that most of us would refer to as protected characteristics. The things about ourselves that we either cannot change or should not have to change in order to obtain employment for which we are qualified. So why do I bring this up? Why do I bring this up? In a normal setting, when someone comes in for an interview, it is a fairly sterilized environment, right? You are only seeing the person that is presenting to you. You are seeing someone who is hopefully come dressed for the occasion. They are seeing you in your office environment, right? There is a certain aura, there's a certain kind of atmosphere that creates. Some of the cases that I've personally been involved in and I've read about and seen an awful lot more of these kinds of cases where someone brings a claim for some form of discrimination have often been because the interview actually went too well. The dialogue was so free-flowing and it was so mutual and it just kind of felt like an ordinary conversation that the interviewer made the mistake of kind of stepping out of that very professionalized role and started to have over-personalized conversation, or vice versa. The interviewee came in and is a sharer and was sharing a bunch of things that the person conducting the interview kind of really wished had never come up, and the interviewer wasn't exactly sure how to get out of it. So I raise these things here because in this virtual environment, one of two things could happen. One, right? What are we seeing behind us? We're seeing, Beth's kitchen, my room that I had to stage so that you didn't see anything too grotesque and embarrassing, right, of my mess. We are seeing a little bit more of each other's kind of natural environments, right, and not necessarily our professional environment. So what might be in the background? Family pictures, right, that the interviewee might have taken. Someone might come in the room and the interviewee says, oh, excuse me, that's my partner who's here, right? Okay, now we may have some indication about sexual orientation. Or, right, these funny viral things that become viral and become funny, these of the news stories, right? And the dog interrupts, or the young child or something. Well, if it's the young child, the dog discrimination isn't on the list, so we're good. There's no pet discrimination. Don't worry about learning that fact.
Yeah, not yet.
Right? But if it is a young child that comes in, right? Or the person you're interviewing says, oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry. My husband, my child has special needs. I just have to go attend to this for one little minute, right? You've now learned something more about that person that fits within one of these categories that you might not otherwise have known. Now, does that make that interview illegal? No, of course not, right? As the interviewer, you didn't ask the question. It just happened, right? You just happened to know this. But you should be aware of, one, don't ask those things, right? So you see the neat picture in the background that looks like a family photo. Say, oh, tell me about that photo. Who's in that photo? Where was that taken? You don't want to ask questions about that personalized environment. And you should know that when you accidentally do become aware of these things, that you know, are on our kind of our protected list, you might know if someone's sexual orientation, you might come to know about their family status, or whether or not they have children, whether or not they're married, all of these things. Do not take that into consideration making your hiring decision, right? And be aware that because that has come out, we might be called you know, to answer for that later. So again, just make sure that doesn't factor in. And then again, as I'm saying at the bottom, this informal setting should not lapse anyone into thinking that what you're doing is any less formal, because what you're doing is every bit as formal in a legal sense than when it happens in your office, right? So think about everything we do now, right? Usually when we get on calls and we, you know, joke about how we look, and we say, oh, how you doing in this quarantine? How's the family holding up? You know, those things that are very nice. I mean, they're just kind of regular conversation. Be mindful. You don't want to say that. You don't say, how's the family holding up during quarantine? Because you know what? The person's going to tell you about their family. They're going to tell you how many kids they have. They're going to tell you how old they are. And you don't want to know that in an interview. Next slide, Beth. Okay. So the other, what's the topic on everyone's mind? Well, obviously COVID. And so how does that play in to interviewing people in this current moment, in interviewing virtually, although almost all of what we're going to talk about right now applies equally to whether or not you would be interviewing in person or virtually. Here are our normal rules. This is always the case, right? When can we ask things that may reveal disability-related information in an interview process? The usual rule is that before we make someone a job offer, the rule is we can't ask anything. We can't ask anything that would tend to reveal whether or not someone has a disability, that would tend to reveal someone's health status or medical status, including whether or not they have COVID-19. The rules on when you can ask things about disability change as you move along in the employment relationship. Once you make a conditional offer of employment, then you can all ask certain questions. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then when someone is your employee, it's yet a new standard. The standard that takes over when someone is your employee is that an inquiry must be job related and consistent with business necessity. But for right now, we're talking about interviewing. So normally we can't ask anything, and that is still the rule. So we cannot ask whether or not someone has medical conditions that make them more vulnerable to COVID. We cannot ask if someone is high risk. We cannot ask if they've been ill. We can make a job offer. This is this last bullet. We can make a job offer that is contingent on answering medical questions, including submitting to a medical examination. So the idea is when you're in the interview stage entirely, you haven't decided whether or not to make an offer of employment to this person, you don't ask anything about their health status. Once you've made a conditional offer, meaning assuming everything checks out, right, on the health side of things, then I'm going to go forward with this offer. Then you can go ahead and ask your questions, all right? You must go ahead to the next slide, Beth, actually. You must make that inquiry of everyone in the job classification, so you can't pick and choose, right? You can't see someone in a virtual interview and think that person looks older. I'm going to ask about whether or not they're high risk or what their health conditions are, or whether or not they've been sick with COVID. You must ask the same questions and apply kind of the same health-related standards to everyone in that job classification. And we're going to go ahead, Beth, actually. We're going to motor right through that one to the next one. So let's drill in now to very specific things about COVID. What can we ask? Could we screen applicants for COVID COVID symptoms? Which is to say, right, we want to know whether or not someone is ill. So what I have been talking about is the answer. After a conditional offer of employment has been made, yes, you could screen someone for COVID symptoms. You could have someone take a COVID test. Have to have that rule for everyone in that job classification. Could you screen applicants, including taking their temperatures, requiring medical documentation about COVID-19 status? Yes, after a conditional offer of employment has been made. Now, the one exception to this, as I have been sitting here thinking about how this plays out. So let's say that you are interviewing on site, and then you have your safety plan that says that everyone entering will have their temperatures taken. That also would be, to me, that rule would apply there and not this one. Because that would be the standard rule for anyone entering your workplace would be to have their temperature. Next screen. So now let's say you were very interested in a candidate and the candidate ends up being positive for COVID-19 or says, yeah, I'd love to accept your job offer. So I'm so excited to get started, but I've got this darn illness and I'm really sick, right? What do you do? If it is possible to delay the start date, that's what you should do. That would be considered a reasonable accommodation if that is possible. If the needs are such that that person was needed immediately and the person is not able to start immediately, you can withdraw the job offer. And we do have that directly from the EEOC. If you want to kind of confirm that, it's on eeoc.gov. Do you want to go next, Beth? High-risk applicants. So there has been a lot of concern on a lot of employers' parts, and it's generally coming from a very good faith, caring place, right? And it's to say, I don't want to bring someone into a work environment that's going to make them sick. And I'm worried because, this person is much older, whether they're an applicant or a new employee, right? They're a much older individual. I know that they've had, if it's a current employee, I know that they've had many health issues, and this just isn't, a safe environment for them. Let's apply that tonality of thinking to the hiring scenario, to the interview scenario. So if we are talking with someone, it is they may be high risk. They're an older person, or they have volunteered. We didn't ask, but they volunteered that they have underlying health conditions or that they are at high risk and they have been worried and nervous. The answer is that we can't deny them employment merely on that basis. That would be considered discriminatory, age discriminatory, to not hire people merely because they're older or because they're pregnant or because we're aware of underlying health conditions. There would be a very narrow exception, and I really want to emphasize how narrow this would be. You would need medical documentation, medical verification, medical proof. Let's say maybe when you did the conditional offer, right? And then they went for their medical exam. If that came back as saying this person really is a significant risk to themselves, a substantial risk to themselves, if they were to go out and work or be in whatever workplace it is that you're offering, then we are to do whatever we can to try to mitigate the risk so that the person can stay employed. It might be extra PPE, right? It might be kind of a revised work or modified work environment. But at the end of the day, if we have solid medical opinion that someone absolutely should not be in the work environment, then it's not discriminatory to deny them employment on that basis. But again, understand that would be after you have the offer of employment out. Okay? And I think we can move on to the next slide, Beth.
Wonderful, Laura, thank you so much. I really appreciate your input and all that information. It's fascinating, and it really is a different world right now for both the interviewer and the interviewee. So thank you very much. What we want to do now is get down into some more specific questions about hiring and from the employer's point of view. So we're going to pose some questions to the group, to Susan, Rob, Carol, and Laura, and I encourage you to make this a conversation. The first question is how to conduct a successful virtual interview. And Laura did touch upon this a little bit in her introduction, but Maybe from Carol or Rob or Susan, you would have some other items to add to that.
Well, from my standpoint, whether an applicant is interviewing in person or virtually, it is critical that they dress appropriately. Image is always critical, right, wrong, or indifferent, Laura, in terms of, a company wants to see the way someone will conduct themselves. So that's important. A virtual interview, the individual should really be in a quiet environment. So to try to take away from distractions. And again, just to make sure things are quiet and not chaotic, as neutral as possible. Those would be my recommendations.
And mine, I'm thinking about this, let's back up a bit from how do you conduct a successful virtual interview to, let's go to how do you get successful job postings in this environment. One of the things that people might consider is doing a video job posting. There is an opportunity to showcase your company a little bit, interview some of the managers that the position might report to, some of the coworkers, get a feel for maybe the culture, and it's interactive. It might be it won't be interactive, but it's a little bit more engaging. And our National Trade Association has pointed out that if you use a video job posting, you get actually 12% increase in views, and you have a higher rate of people applying for that job of about 34% higher than typical. So backing up and starting that idea might be a good way to start before you actually do the interview.
So for us on the employer side, so it really comes down to the same thing as any interview in terms of being prepared and doing research. On the employer side, I think for us, it goes down to training our supervisors how to conduct virtual interviews. Investing in the technology so that you have the proper technology. So the software, from the cameras to the audio, to the lighting, to the background, all those kinds of things from an employer standpoint, we're working on now so that we can conduct these more effectively. And then really the preparation, the question preparation, we may skinny down our assessment questions so that it's a little bit more meaningful. But then we're also looking for on the applicant side, on the candidate side, what type of preparation did they do for this virtual interview? Did they clean up their background? Did they put a collared shirt on? Are they prepared for the interview? And I like to look at both sides. And there's a book that's been out there for a while. It's called The Essential Digital Interview Handbook, and I can send it around. And it's really a candidate's view. So I know as an employer what candidates really should be doing to prepare. But the biggest thing for us right now moving forward from conducting successful virtual interviews is really spending the time to train our supervisors and a lot of our interviewers that have never done it before. For me, we've done it, right? But it's the rest of the staff and making sure that we connect with the candidate, virtually.
And Rob, I think that to your point and to Carol's point, it's the same traditional model is in place. It's, you're well prepared, you have an agenda, you have your preset questions ready to go. It's making sure that that's all, as Laura pointed out, contingents, how you normally do it, but then also thinking about, is there a better way to connect with people because you're not going to be there in person? So I think active listening on both parts is really important to have some sort of connection, because you're going to have an odd, you're not going to be there in person. It's an odd situation for people.
Agreed.
And also to one other thing, if I could add, candidates really need to be assured. So, assure the candidate that, the environment they're going in is safe, it's healthy, the company is doing the right things, they're being proactive in terms of what's going on in the environment right now. So get them to a level of comfort so they feel good about going forward with the process.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All excellent points, Carol. I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that's so important right now. And Rob, I wanted to ask you, can you put on the chat, please, the name of that book and the author? And I'll go ahead and share it with the group,
I sure will.
because I think that'll be really helpful to so many of our folks that are listening in. And then Susan, I loved your idea of the video for the employer looking for an employee. Where can they, in addition to their own website, which is I'm sure where they're posting it, can they post these videos to like LinkedIn, for example, or Indeed?
Put in any of the traditional job boards that you use. You know, it's no different than putting up a blog or an ad. It's just more visual.
It's such a great idea, such a great idea. And getting an idea of the culture, you had mentioned that, and I think that's so important.
I think it's important. And, you know, we recently conducted a survey among our candidates and our clients. And many of the clients have already said to us, they're not going to go back to everyone working in the office. So everybody's looking at how does this new world look going forward? And that may be something to take into consideration when you're looking at your talent pool. Is there a reluctance on that person's part? Because to Carol's point, maybe they don't feel safe going back there, but could you offer them remote working? You know, is that a possibility too?
Yeah, excellent, excellent point. Thank you so much. We're gonna go on to our next general question, and please keep those questions coming to me via chat because we will address those at the end of the formal presentation. How to hire a remote worker. So obviously there's a process that we have in place when we are making offers, and that's easy to do when we're in the office, but with so many of us working remotely, what goes into and how does the process differ to actually make an offer and hire somebody who will be working from home?
So I'll take a crack at that first. I think that we're already there. Prior to the pandemic, we were making, technology investments where we could conduct these things, the electronic onboarding. We have a software that we use called Applicant Pro that it's really from recruitment to day one. And so everything is done virtually between supervisors, assessments are online, interviews are scheduled, notes are on there. So we've already done that. The biggest challenge for us is day one. And then from an employment compliance standpoint is when is the appropriate time to get the I-9, because there's certain requirements as to how you verify, your legal right to work. So we've actually, have on our agenda to include a FaceTime, a Zoom, where we can actually verify identification via video, and hopefully that will meet the compliance standards. So we're already there. So investing in a recruiting platform, whatever it is, that can kind of give you, from the recruitment piece all the way to day one and onboarding, we're doing it. And I think most companies, if they're not, they're getting there. Some companies are probably further advanced than we are, but and then it's really just constant communication, with supervisors, with hiring managers, with our payroll department kind of thing.
Right. We do the same. We have e-docs to do all of the initial work of signing somebody up to work with us. And Laura's helped us on some of the refinement that we made in the last 2 months to that process. So thank you, Laura. That's been helpful. But it makes it easier all the way around rather than having a lot of paper.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
I know Center State CEO hired a new director of member services, and he started at the end of March. So it's while we have been working remotely, and it's been interesting to get to know him while we're all working remotely and on Zoom calls. And I know that we're anxious to get back into the office to really, so he can really understand our culture. And I'm sure everybody feels that way. But there also are some companies that their employees will remain working remotely, or maybe there are some positions that are hired specifically to work remotely. So, it's different for every business. Absolutely.
But even though you hire a remote worker, it's critical to make that remote worker feel a part of the operation. Reaching out to them, having your staff reach out to them, having your team reach out to them, so that they don't feel isolated. They feel part of the team. So encourage that. I would encourage that.
So important. Excellent point. Thank you, Carol. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go to our next question. How to recruit new staff during this time of a crisis. So recruiting, you're looking to hire, you have positions that are open and available and you need to fill. How is your recruiting done differently now in this climate?
I'll answer that. You can call Susan or myself.
No, don't call them.
Yes, thank you, Carol.
Call me. Call me. I think for us, you know, the biggest thing, and Carol mentioned it earlier, was making sure that your brand is a culture of health and safety, right? So that candidates will understand that the level of care and concern that you have, that you're not going to be reckless with hiring. You're not going to ignore what's gone on in our country, in our community over the last several months. So creating that assurance that Carol said, you know, and then secondly, openly sharing your business plan and being more transparent. You know, people are going to want to know. I can only speak, you know, for us. Destiny's closed. When are they going to be open? You know, what is the future of malls? Where are you going to go? How are you going to handle this? You know, being prepared to present your business plan so candidates can get comfortable with the opportunity, right? And then from a strategy standpoint, from an art standpoint, in terms of recruiting, making sure that we're posting and recruiting everywhere we can virtually, so that we can, you know, so that we can get candidates to our site, having our site attractive and interesting, and having some cool interviews and those kinds of things. You know, all those kind of things go into the art and the strategy for us in competing with talent. And the other thing is really to be authentic. You know, we're not going to pretend to be someone that we're not. We're not going to try to convince a candidate to come here. You can work remotely for the rest of your career, right? We're certainly changing and we're evolving, but not being afraid to be transparent with what your culture is and what the expectations are, so that you are recruiting and zeroing in on prospective candidates that are looking for exactly what you're offering.
I think that's a great point, Rob. And when you think about it, any opportunity to that you're using to recruit is an opportunity to expand, you know, talk about your brand. Mm-hmm. And your brand should reflect all of those cultural things that you mentioned. So it's a marketing opportunity, not just for potential new talent, but also for people that are just out there looking around what's available. Yeah.
Absolutely. Carol, anything you want to throw in?
No, I agree. I think Susan and Rob said it perfectly. So totally concur.
I couldn't agree more. And I know when you guys were talking, it made me think of a program that Center State CEO is spearheading right now, along with Advanced Media. And I do have to mention it, but goodlifecny.com is a great website that we are using in working with all of our partners, all of our members, all the entire business community, really, in encouraging people to come to Central New York, work, live, and play, because it's a great place. Mm-hmm. So that's another tool that I encourage you to use. It's goodlifecny.com.
Yeah, I think we're on there. Thank you, Beth, for that. And just to kind of go back onto, this certainly isn't a commercial for Applicant Pro, because there's a lot of programs out there that people can use for recruitment, but Applicant Pro allows us to post on well over 300 job boards. So, you know, and then it kind of, you know, corrals all that data for us. So any type of that investment in technology to get that message out to a broader audience. You know, now maybe we can hire a financial analyst who lives in Chicago or New York and who doesn't want to move here. I think we want to get them here, but it does expand for some people. So the more you can get the message out with technology, you know, I think the more successful you're going to be.
And we're finding that a lot of people are recruiting outside of the Central New York area. We're working with our clients who are in about half a dozen states right now, and they're not necessarily going to be in Syracuse. So that's an interesting point, Rob.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I actually put that in the chat for everybody that Rob mentioned, Applicant Pro. So for all of our folks on the line right now who do hiring, definitely check that out, Applicant Pro. So thank you very much for that, Rob. That was great.
Okay.
HR compliance associated with hiring. Laura touched on a lot of this at the very beginning, and really did a very thorough job of covering that. But from specifically the hiring standpoint, I was wondering if Rob or Carol or Susan had anything that they wanted to include on here, especially again, because there's so much remote work being done. Is there anything in particular that we need to be mindful of?
You know, one change at least, and I'm sure Susan would agree, that has caused a little bit of concern to clients is that you can't ask what people are currently making anymore. That has really put a twist in it. Basically, you can ask what they're looking for, but you can't ask what their current comp is. And so getting around that is, as we find, challenging.
Yeah, and I think that comes to the point of, you know, do you have your job, the salary compliant with what everybody else is paying? You know,
Yeah.
is it the right price point, if you will?
Exactly.
And you'll find out if it isn't, because you won't get talent. I mean, I still think there's going to be a shortage of talent, even though we're in this COVID space right now.
I agree. And with the incentives right now for people to stay out is critical. I mean, that extra money is, or that extra compensation is really causing people to hold back and maybe not go forward with taking a position. So I think educating the climate out there, or educating the talent out there is critical, that this will change and opportunities, will be less. So education is critical.
Yeah, and I think Laura hit a lot of the important points from a compliance standpoint. It's really important that you base your hiring decisions based on experience and on education and
Right.
the results of the interview, not any other reasons, right? So, but the biggest compliance thing for us has really been the whole I-9 thing and how we want to be able to handle that going forward, because of the timetable. The salary, the non-disclosure on the salary does create some lag for us, but we manage our way around that legally.
There had been talk in the legislature about extending the additional $600 per week, right? At this point, my understanding is that has not gone anywhere, and so we would continue to expect that it will end at the end of July. But it has been a problem. It has been a tough thing, to get around when we can't offer, we as the employer just can't offer the same amount of money to someone who is on unemployment. There are ways to contest that. I mean, if you're finding that that's a problem, if someone does not have a valid basis for refusing employment, and and just wanting this extra $600 is not a valid basis for refusing employment, those complaints can be filed with the New York State Department of Labor.
Well, Laura, that's a great point. Can you say that you're not feeling safe to go back to work because of COVID? Is that a new issue?
So part of the CARES Act was to expand the reasons that a person could validly refuse employment, right, and be eligible for unemployment. So the school closures are in there. People whose medical conditions prevent them from working, but merely just kind of not feeling comfortable shouldn't be enough. There should actually be kind of a medically based reason, meaning a doctor is agreeing that someone shouldn't be working because of their underlying health conditions, and not just, I just don't really feel like it, either because the money's so great, we know that's not a valid basis, or even I just don't really feel safe. Now, the dilemma, of course, is unemployment being so overwhelmed, right, with claims. I don't know how much of that is really being looked at, right?
Yeah, I'll make just a kind of a commercial on the whole claim thing, because I think people need to be aware that there is a lot of fraud out there. And if you have someone who's handling your unemployment claims, make sure that they're on top of that. We actually have, People Systems is who we use to handle our claims. And, we got notification of 4 or 5 employees that are working full time, notifications from them and from the state that people had filed fraudulent claims under their names. And those employees actually have to go, the employer has to go online and the employee has to go online and fill out a fraud form. So there's a lot of fraud out there. I think the governor talked about it early on, and it is happening. So just kind of, I know it's kind of a little off topic, but it's an important message to get out there.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad we touched on that. We've heard that from so many members, that the $600 incentive, employers were concerned about getting their employees to come back with those additional dollars. So I'm so glad that you all addressed that. Thank you very much. Thank you. So with that, I want to get to the Q&A, and of course there we go. I want to get to the Q&A, and we do have some questions in our chat, and I encourage you, our attendees, please continue to populate the questions in our chat. And if we don't address every question, at the end of this webinar, I will be forwarding the questions on to our presenters, and they will be responding to the questions personally. So they agreed to do that. So all of your questions will be addressed. Thank you. Our first question is, if applicants offer info about getting tested, etc., are we allowed to ask them about that?
I would not. So the rule is when someone offers you information voluntarily that you're not supposed to have, you haven't done anything wrong because they're volunteering it to you. But you can slip down that slippery slope by having further conversation about it, right? So kind of classic example is someone mentions that they're pregnant, just move on, right? There's, as opposed to, oh, how far along are you? Oh, what are your plans? Who's gonna look after it? You don't wanna, you should not kind of go farther down that road as a general rule with someone. I'm trying to think of, maybe instances in which that would come up where it would make sense to have a conversation. I suppose if what someone was saying, so I can think of one maybe. So if what someone was saying was, look, I want to volunteer that, I've had COVID, I have the antibodies, I'm Superman. It's great. We're not going to treat that person any differently. I mean, they're still going to, be subject to all the same protocols and everything else. If someone were to say, look, I do want to tell you that I am experiencing some symptoms of COVID, how quickly do you need me? Well, then you'd answer that part of the question, right? Well, our timeline is flexible in terms of a start date, or this is a position you can telework in, and as long as you're feeling well enough to telework, we're good to go. Or the answer might be, this actually is a very immediate hire date. Susan, I'm sure Susan and Carol have those all the time. This is very immediate. This is, if you can't be there on Friday morning, then this opportunity isn't for you. You can focus on that back end of the issue and not the front end of the issue.
Okay. So always err on the side of caution. Less is more. Don't overly engage in any conversation that could be deemed illegal. Really.
Right. At the interview stage, once you have that conditional offer out, the world is your oyster, and you can ask, and you can have detailed conversations about what someone needs in terms of accommodations. But you want to be careful before the conditional job offer is out.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Another question, is there an age range for age discrimination, or are all ages protected, or only up to a certain age?
Yeah, great question. So under federal law, we are protected from age discrimination only if we are ages 40 and older. And there really is no such thing as reverse age discrimination in the federal law. So you can't say I was discriminated against because the employer preferred someone older than me. On the state side, our New York State human rights law picks up age discrimination as of age 18, and it does recognize a reverse age discrimination claim, although those are kind of Cheshire cats. I mean, it's pretty tough to make out a claim that being a younger person, you were discriminated against. I mean, if anything, it's because you were inexperienced and because you weren't qualified, right? It's very unlikely to be age. And no, there is no age at which you stop being eligible to be employed. So if you have an applicant up here who is 100 years old, right, you would treat that applicant exactly the same as every other applicant and determine whether or not that person is qualified for the job.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. We're curious, and this might be a question for everybody. So if anybody who's attending wants to jump on and answer this question, we'll give it first to Susan and Rob and Carol and Laura, but then if anybody else wants to jump in and answer this question, we would encourage you to do so. But we have someone asking, we're curious if other employers are experiencing interviewees ghosting the employer.
Oh.
So they're just not showing up for interviews.
Yes.
Yeah.
Easy answer. Yes.
Yeah, that's definitely increasing without hesitation.
Yeah, and I think that's why you have to be really diligent in your interviewing process. You need to stay on top of it, keep it tight,
Yes.
stay in contact with the candidate, particularly if it's a top candidate you're interested in. Don't let a few days slide because people are looking at other opportunities.
Very much so. Totally concur, Susan.
Yeah, we have a different term for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe not appropriate.
Not appropriate. No, it really is become a big issue for us, I think, and frustrating. But to Susan's point, I mean, you just got to stay out in front of them. In some instances, there are real situations where something does come up for candidates, but we've heard a lot of them. But it is frustrating. It's part of it now. I'd rather as an employer focus on what we can control, right? So we'll never ghost a candidate. We're going to make sure we reach out and stay in contact, and sometimes whatever happens.
Yeah. If there's any other HR professionals on the line too that want to unmute themselves, you're welcome to introduce yourself and address this question. If you've experienced maybe a higher incidence of being ghosted by interviewees.
We have not, but maybe we're, because of who we're hiring is more early stage engineers who they're super stressed about entering the workforce right now. And so they're all, and a lot of their internships have dried up, and so they're sort of panicking to find, something to, not have any gaps on what they're doing, and also just to stay busy. So I think we're in a little bit different situation probably than a lot of companies.
Excellent. Thank you, Romy. I appreciate it. And we have another question for our panelists. Any advice on getting managers more comfortable having remote employees and feeling good about productivity in these roles? This is a good question.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had some of our clients say that productivity has increased as people are working from home. There may be less distractions, and it depends on what your technology is. To Rob's point earlier, making sure you've got the most up-to-date technology helps you keep on tabs on how much work is being done, how much time they're actually engaging. But we've had many clients say to us that their productivity levels have gone up.
Yeah, we've seen that too. I think that it goes to engagement, it goes to communicating. Early on, we put out an engagement survey, and we wanted to kind of check the pulse. People were being more productive. The biggest challenge was the stay-at-home parents with the school-age kids, so, we allowed them to extend and flex their days beyond the regular workday, right? So you get an email at 1 o'clock in the morning from somebody.
Yeah.
Not that you had to respond to it, but it's constant communication with them, and the supervisors and managers being comfortable in reaching out. We put a lot of things on pause. Obviously, it's a difficult time to do performance reviews when you're working remotely for the first time. So we kind of paused the reviews, but what we've encouraged is, one-on-one conversations on, did you meet your goals this week? How are you feeling about, work? Here's where, you think you got to get better. Just really more task oriented and deadline driven stuff. But most of them have really risen to the occasion, and we haven't missed a beat. We've done everything, in our power to just get our centers and get us back to operating, what we do. So the employees that are working remotely, the ones that weren't furloughed, are actually taking on more. So we're checking in with them in terms of their workload. So just constant really communication between the supervisor, and the remote worker.
Mhm.
That was an excellent question. Thank you so much. It's something that we've talked about, I know, at Center State CEO as well. And we have found, and either Susan or Rob mentioned this, that we are certainly extending our work days. They start earlier, they end later because, sometimes the way the weather works out, you want to take your daily walk at 2 o'clock. And so it means you work till 6, and that's okay too. And I know Krista Glazier, who's our Director of Communications, is on the line right now, and she is probably the most guilty of sending out those 1 a.m. emails. So I'm going to call Krista out on that. And she's home with 2 young kids. So I think you hit the nail on the head, that it's just, you get the work done when it needs to get, when you're able to get it done. So that is it with our questions from the group. If anybody wants to throw one on there.
I would just have Laura just kind of comment on the, the exempt and non-exempt, any rules that we should, make sure that we understand in terms of those extended work days and how the FLSA, and the exempt non-exempt kind of works.
It's a great point.
Yeah, no, it's great, Robin. Actually, when someone was talking earlier, I had in my mind, the working from home for the first time. And so much of, I think, our historical and traditional reluctance to have people working at home was because of these FLSA concerns. It's because, when the people aren't at work and when you've given them constant access to work, they may in fact would be constantly working, which means you will owe them, more pay for that if they are non-exempt. Or they may be working, not reporting it, and you're getting the 1 a.m. emails, but they don't seem to be, reporting that they're working all of this, additional time. And how do you even know if it's additional, or it's, what they were just, making up because they were not working earlier in the day. So there's no silver bullet to that other than a lot of documented communication if someone is non-exempt about the importance of recording all of their work time. Right. You can have rules that say that people cannot work overtime unless they have prior permission to work overtime, and you can treat it as a disciplinary offense if they continue to work overtime without authorization. You have to pay them for it, but you actually eventually could terminate someone if they refuse to stop working the overtime. I think that's the solution is constant documented communication so that it's clear that the employer's perspective was, we want to pay you for all of the time worked. We still want to control how much that is, but we want to pay you for all time worked. And of course, if someone is non-exempt, it's really not an issue.
Rob, I'm so glad that you brought that up with the distinction between the exempt and non-exempt employees, because that definitely is an issue. So thank you for bringing that up. And Laura, thank you for addressing that. So that concludes our webinar this afternoon. And I want to thank Laura and Carol and Rob and Susan for being with us today and sharing their expertise with us. These are all unbelievable business leaders in our community, and we are very lucky to have them with us today. And I'm sure they would be happy if you ever wanted to reach out to them directly. Susan Crossett is with CPS Recruitment, Rob Didio with Pyramid Companies, Carol Fletcher with CR Fletcher, and Laura Harshbarger with Schoeneck and King. So thank you. And I also want to encourage all of our attendees, if there's anything Center State CEO can do to be helpful to you in your efforts, especially when it comes to reopening, as we are looking at phase 3 potentially coming very soon. A lot of us are thinking about getting back in the office, and I know we are as an organization. So please visit our website. We have a whole section dedicated to COVID-19 resources. We have an unbelievable toolkit, which is filled with good information that we encourage you to check out. And also, we have a really robust events calendar that we are hosting a number of professional development and networking events. We do a webinar series every Friday, but please visit our events. All of our events right now are free to both members and non-members. It is our #1 priority to serve the business community as a whole right now. And so please engage with us and let us know what we can do to be helpful to you. So again, thank you, Laura, Carol, Rob, and Susan, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you,
Thank
Beth.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
You.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great day.
Thanks.
You as well. Thank you.